My in-laws are trying to kick me out of the family estate, but I've got a secret that changes everything." Rachel Harris thought her life had finally found some stability. She and her husband Adam had worked hard to give their young son Peter a comfortable home after years of financial struggles and navigating complicated family relationships. Rachel hoped the worst was behind them. She hadn't spoken to her father, Richard, in over a decade. The choice had been Rachel had never forgiven her father for the way he treated her mother before she passed away. Richard had made it clear that he didn't want anything to do with Rachel after she married Adam. Rachel thought her father's chapter in her life was over, but one chilly October evening, that chapter burst wide open. She just got back from work, tired but happy. It was meant to be a quiet night, maybe a simple dinner or a movie night with Adam and Peter. She was looking for something to cook in the kitchen when her phone rang. She checked the number. It was someone she didn't know. Normally she'd ignore such calls, but something made her answer the phone. "Hello, is this Rachel Harris?" a formal voice asked. "Yes, this is she," Rachel replied, her curiosity piqued. "Mrs. Harris, my name is Philip Crawford. I'm a lawyer representing your late father, Richard Harris. I'm afraid I have some important news for you regarding his estate." Rachel froze, her hand gripping the countertop. "My father?" Rachel was taken aback when Philip told her that her father had passed away. They hadn't spoken in years, so it was unexpected to hear about death from someone she didn't know. Philip offered his condolences and suggested they meet the next day to discuss some matters related to her father's estate. Inheritance he left behind. Rachel could barely say anything beyond agreeing to the meeting. She hung up, her thoughts a blur of shock and confusion. She had long imagined what she might feel when her estranged father died, but now that it was real, she felt numb. No tears, just an unsettling emptiness. Adam walked into the kitchen, seeing her pale face. "Is it you look like you've seen a ghost?" She slowly shook her head. "My father, he's dead and he left something for me. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel right now. I didn't expect this. I need to know what he left for me." Why now after all these years? The next morning, Rachel made her way to Philip Crawford's office with Adam by her side. The building was old with creaky floors and high ceilings. Philip greeted them at the door and ushered them into his small office. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a kind expression. He was an older man with a kind face and a sympathetic expression as he gestured for them to sit. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Harris," he began, sitting across from them. "I know this must be difficult. Your father was a complex man, but he made specific provisions in his will for you." Rachel took a deep breath and nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Your father's estate includes a property, the family house you grew up in fact. He left it all to you." Rachel blinked, struggling to take in the information. "The old house," she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. She hadn't set foot there since her mother's funeral, and the memories of that place were more painful than comforting. Why would he leave her the house? They hadn't spoken in years, and he didn't want her in his life. Philip hesitated, glancing down at the papers in front of him. He didn't leave any explanation in writing, but the fact remains. "The house is yours now, along with some other assets like accounts and investments. I'd suggest going to the property to see what's what. Your father left some personal items for you, and he was pretty adamant about that." Rachel exchanged a look with Adam, who gave her a nod to show he was encouraging. She turned back to Philip and said, "Okay." She felt a strange mix of emotions, resentment, confusion, and even curiosity. Rachel and Adam decided to go to the house the following weekend. Peter stayed with Adam's parents, who were happy to keep him busy for the day. The road to the house was winding and familiar, reminding Rachel of memories she'd buried long ago. As they approached the house, it seemed to loom tall and loosen, with its faded paint and overgrown garden. It sent a shiver down her spine, as if time had stood still there. They got out of the car and Rachel took a deep breath before leading Adam up the front steps. She put the key Philip had given her in the lock, and the door opened, revealing the dusty interior. The house smelled of old wood and stale air. Rachel could almost hear echoes of her past, her mother's laughter, her father's stern voice. "This place is exactly how I remember it," she said quietly, looking around the dimly lit hallway and the furniture. The house was still there, covered in white sheets and lined with family photos. They were faded but intact. Rachel's gaze landed on one photo in particular, her mother smiling warmly, holding Rachel as a child. She felt a pang of longing. "Where do you think these items are?" Adam asked. "I'm not sure," Philip replied. Rachel moved through the hallway, her footsteps echoing. She paused outside her father's study. The door was slightly ajar, and something drew her inside. The room was filled with old books, papers, and a large desk that seemed untouched. On the desk sat a small ornate box with her name on it. Rachel hesitated before opening it. Inside, she found letters all addressed to her. She picked up the first one. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakably her father's, neat and precise. The letter began, "I know I failed. I know I pushed you away when you needed me most. I never knew how to handle my grief after your mother died. I blamed you for things that were never your fault. I hope this house and the letters can make amends for the pain I caused you." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as she read. Adam moved closer, placing a comforting hand on her back. She reached for another letter, then another. One was full of words of regret, attempts at explaining his actions, and expressions of love that she had never heard from him in her lifetime. "I had no idea," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. "He never said any of this to me, not once." Adam pulled her into a gentle embrace. Maybe this was his way of trying to make things right. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it sounds like he regretted it. Rachel nodded, wiping her tears. "I think I needed to hear that. Even though it's too late, I needed to know he cared." They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the house, finding more small mementos, photos, her mother's jewelry, and even a few of Rachel's childhood toys. It was as if Richard had been holding on to the best parts of their family, even as he pushed Rachel away. As they prepared to leave, Rachel stood in the living room looking around one last time. The house no longer felt the same. It felt as haunted as it once had. Instead, it felt like a place where healing could begin, not just for her, but perhaps for the memory of her father too. As they walked back to the car, Adam asked, "What do you want to do with the house?" Rachel paused, considering. "I think I want to keep it," she replied. "Not to live in, but maybe to fix it up. It's part of my past, and maybe it's time I stop running from it." Adam smiled, squeezing her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'm here with you." As they drove away, Rachel looked back at the house and felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined for her relationship with her father, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter. One where she could let go of the anger and embrace the complicated, messy love that had always been there, hidden beneath years of pain. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel found herself returning to the house more often. She began cleaning up the garden and clearing away the overgrowth that had consumed it. There was something cathartic about the physical labor of restoring something that had been neglected for so long. She could feel her resentment slowly giving way to acceptance. One day, as she was trimming the hedges, she heard a voice call out from the street. "Excuse me, are you the new owner?" She looked up to see an elderly woman standing there. She started going to the house more often. She began cleaning up the garden, clearing away the overgrowth that had consumed it. There was something cathartic about the physical labor of restoring something that had been neglected for so long. She could feel her resentment slowly giving way to acceptance. One day, as she was trimming the hedges, she heard a voice call out from the street. "Excuse me, are you the new owner?" She looked up to see an elderly woman standing there. By the gate, her eyes kind but curious. "Yes, I am. My father used to live here," Rachel replied, setting down her tools. The woman smiled. "I'm Margaret. I used to be friends with your mother years ago. I've lived down the street for as long as I can remember. When I saw someone working on the garden, I hoped it might be you." Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest. "You knew my mother?" Margaret nodded, her eyes softening. "Oh yes, she was wonderful." Margaret told Rachel that they used to have tea together on the weekends. She loved this garden. It was nice to see it coming back to life. Rachel invited Margaret inside, and they spent hours talking. Margaret shared stories about her mother that Rachel had never heard. These stories included her mother's kindness, laughter, and dreams for the future. Rachel felt a connection to her parents that she had thought was lost forever. Rachel decided to restore the house, not just for herself, but for her mother's memory. She hired contractors to fix the roof, repaint the walls, and update the plumbing. Adam was really helpful, helping her whenever he could. And even Peter got involved, planting flowers in the garden with his small hands. The transformation was slow, but with each improvement, the house felt more and more like a home. The house began to feel less like a relic of a painful past, and more like a tribute to the love that had once filled it. Rachel found herself smiling more often. The weight she had carried for so many years slowly lifted one evening as they sat on the newly restored porch. Adam turned to Rachel. He said, "You've done an amazing job. Your mom would be so proud of you." Rachel looked out at the garden, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. "I think my dad would be too," she said softly. It was the first time she'd allowed herself to think of him that way, not just as the man who'd hurt her, but as someone who'd tried, in his own flawed way, to make amends. "You're right," Adam said, taking her hand. The house, once a symbol of all the hurt and anger, was now a place of hope and renewal. Rachel had carried a lot of anger, but now she felt hope and renewal. The house was still filled with memories, but they no longer haunted her. Instead, they reminded her of where she had come from and how far she had come. Rachel knew she couldn't change the past, but she could choose how to move forward. As she sat there surrounded by the love of her family, she felt ready to do just that, one day at a time.